and welcome along to the latest episode of the Manchester is Red podcast from the Manchester Evening News. I'm today's host, George Smith, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined as ever by Samuel Luckhurst and Tyrone Marshall this Friday lunchtime. First of all, Samuel, how are you?
Yep, very well, thank you, George. How are you? You looking forward to Wembley?
Yeah, very much so. And Ty, how about yourself? Everything good at your end?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, George. I'm good. I'm looking forward to what I'm hoping is going to be a thrilling playoff weekend with plenty of twists and turns, which I'm sure you'll embrace too.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Well, away from the playoffs and looking at the Premier League, the job is done, of course, for Manchester United. The mission has been accomplished. They will play Champions League football again next season. They officially got the job done last night, beating Chelsea 4-1 at Old Trafford. Goals from Casemiro, Anthony Martial, Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford got the job done. There was some questionable defending in the first half, it must be said. The scoreline was not quite the way you would think the game went if you looked at the full-time score that evening, but United got the job done. It was quite convincing eventually. And Samuel, first of all, what did you make to what you saw last night?
Good question. Chelsea played reasonably well in phases, but I suppose the overall game, it was a reliable gauge of where these two teams are at. Chelsea can't score. United do struggle to score, but they often do find a way of winning games, and it was a rarity for them to be 2-0 up at home at Old Trafford last night. I think it was only the third time that's happened all season, possibly. And you did sense that there was the possibility there that they could cut loose and maybe get the biggest win of the season, and they should have done in the end. And I say biggest win of the season, 4-0 is still pretty modest in terms of thrashings, but at least I suppose for the supporters, they saw United cutting loose. I don't think anybody really could ever see United losing that game. Chelsea did have a great chance with Mudryk at the start when it was 0-0, and the other side of the Casemiro goal, Havertz had a header, but in the main, you don't really have any faith in Chelsea to be taking those chances or posing much of a threat. And certainly when the team sheet dropped, I think that the confidence would have coursed around the stadium that United were going to get the job done, and it never seemed in any doubt, I don't think. I mean, in terms of deadlines or trying to get your work done as quickly as possible for your own sake. My piece for the game was pretty much done by full time. It was just the Wi-Fi, unfortunately, at Old Trafford, since they changed the Wi-Fi has got worse on our laptops at least. So that was pretty much the only hiccup all night as far as the whole evening was concerned. Never mind for United.
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, the first half, you obviously touched on there. Chelsea, they had some very presentable opportunities, and on another day, a better side probably would have punished United for that. But in the end, they got the job done relatively comfortably. Obviously, they went 4 goals in front until Joao Felix pulled one back. The second half, there was a lot more control and balance the way United played, I thought.
Yeah, there was. They were probably fortunate to be 2-0 up at half time. They scored that early goal through Casemiro, and then after that, they were second best for most of the half. Really, I think there was one stat. I think it was just before they scored. We had the Sky graphics and footage on the TVs in the press box, and there was one stat that said revealed basically the stats since Casemiro's goal, and I think Chelsea had something like 65% possession, 5 shots to 2, 3 times as many touches in the opposition box, and there was a good spell in the first half where they did look really dangerous, and Havertz and Mudryk both missed really good, really presentable chances. So there was a good spell there where you thought Chelsea are right in this game and probably deserved to be level, but that second goal just took the stuffing out of them. It was obviously a very young Chelsea team, I think the youngest they've ever fielded in the Premier League era. They're obviously devoid of confidence, so I think the second goal did kill them off, and United started the second half on the front foot, and they were more in control. They were less open at the back. There were still moments for Chelsea, and even the goal, conceding that goal when you're 4-0 up is pretty poor. It was a really soft goal to concede. There was no pressure whatsoever in midfield. The defence backed off and backed off and backed off, and not only backed off, they basically walked away from the goal to give Felix a clear shot towards De Gea. It didn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but we all know what Ten Hag's like now, and I'm sure he'll be looking at that today, thinking you've got to do better there. Whatever the game situation, you can't concede goals that are that soft, because it was too simple for Felix, I thought. But no, the second half was a better performance than the first, and I mean, United could have scored a lot more goals than 4. They were dominant in the second half, and even after they'd conceded, they could have scored another 3. And there was only about 5 minutes of the game left, including injury time. I think they missed 3 1-on-1s after Chelsea had pulled one back, and the game was stretched at that point. It had lost all sense of control and balance, and United were just cutting through Chelsea at will, so they could have scored a lot more goals. And yeah, the second half was a good performance, and an encouraging result given the status of the season and what's coming up for United on the horizon.
Yeah, definitely, and it was just a pity that one moment kind of put her down on the whole evening, and that was, of course, Anthony's early exit in the first half. Obviously went down in quite a significant amount of pain and discomfort, and obviously taken off on a stretcher. Samuel, you wrote last night after Erik ten Hag had spoken that he described it as a serious injury. Obviously, we don't know the full extent of it just yet, but I think, reading between the lines, it doesn't look great ahead of the FA Cup final next week for Anthony, does it?
No, sometimes people see a player like Anthony go down and they think that he may be feigning injury, but it did seem pretty genuine at the time, and I don't think he was necessarily appealing for a foul against Chalobah, because the tackle was it was completely legitimate. There wasn't an issue with that, but he was clearly in some discomfort, and certainly when he tried to get up to his feet, which was, the medical staff probably should have told him not to even bother doing that, because it was so clear that his race was run at that point, and that was the confirmation there that he couldn't even put any weight on it. So it's a big issue looking ahead to the cup final, because I think he would have been one of the players whose place was nailed on, even though he didn't start against City in the January derby when United won, and Anthony came on at half time, I think, that day. But he's pretty much the only left-footed forward they've got available, and he would have certainly helped the balance of that team. And I think we discussed this earlier in the week about the likelihood of Fernandes playing on the wing. Now you have to decide which wing is he going to play on. I think maybe if Anthony had been fit, you'd have just thought logically Fernandes will play off the left and maybe Rashford up front. I just can't see a scenario where it's Eriksen and Casemiro as the midfielders against City's midfield, because City's midfield is so brilliant. Casemiro and Eriksen have been excellent, but I still think that there's going to be a tweak to that front six, and that does, of course, impact on the wings, and it's a place that's up for grabs now. And given how well he actually did from the right last night, you would possibly go with Sancho and go with Fernandes on the left. And it's strange how United and Sancho have come full circle, in that for all those years he was identified as the panacea to their right wing ills. Then he comes in and he only performed last season when he had that stint on the left under Ralf Rangnick. He starts on the left at the start of this season, and he has not had a successful season. He's underwhelmed, to put it politely. But he did play quite well when he switched to the right last night. He was one of United's weakest players until he laid that one on the plate for Martial, and then he had a pretty reasonable second half, pretty good second half, much better decision making and much quicker as well. So it's a good, as Frank Lampard said yesterday in his embargoed section, it's a good headline. Jadon Sancho coming up against his former club in an FA Cup final, and maybe that's what Ten Hag will play on. But it's, however flaky Anthony can be and however mercurial he can be, his probable absence from that final is a real big loss for United, because I think they would have had a much better balance with him in the team.
Yeah, you mentioned there, Jadon Sancho obviously played a key hand in United's second goal for Martial last night, but the other man that played a significant role in that was Casemiro, with a wonderful little chip pass into his path to tee up Martial for the second goal, and obviously he scored the first one. Casemiro was brought in to steady the ship in midfield and completely, transform the way United looked in the middle. But it's now 13 direct goal contributions for him this season. It's quite a tally. I think only Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes have actually got more in the United team now. He's delivering, goal scoring expertise that we didn't really expect. He's chipping in at big moments in big games, and it only adds to the quality of a very, very, very good footballer, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. There's only 4 players in the team who've scored more goals than him, and then, like you say, you throw in the assists as well. I was doing a piece on him at the game yesterday and looked up his numbers and knew he'd got 7 goals, but was surprised to see those 6 assists. And, of course, he won't get an assist for Martial's goal, but it was entirely down to him. His contribution to that goal was bigger than Sancho's and Martial, really. Sancho timed his run well, but it was a fairly easy ball across to Martial, although we weighted it well, and Martial obviously tapped it in, but it was Casemiro that basically cracked open the game and cracked open the pitch for United with that clever little dinked ball. And yeah, he's been excellent these last 2 weeks. I thought since his latest suspension he'd been below par, actually. I didn't think he'd been playing particularly well until this week, but there's something quite fitting about him scoring the 2 goals to get United over the line as well. And we all know that when he was watching them lose 4-0 at Brentford in August, he basically said to his agent, to his representatives, tell them I'll fix this. There was no thoughts of backing out. He wanted a new challenge, and he basically has fixed it in the final week of the season, scoring those 2 goals, get back in the Champions League. It's certainly where he'll feel he'll belong, having won it 5 times. And he is, he's a huge player for United on and off the pitch. And I think if they could have expected maybe what he's delivered on the pitch, maybe not the goal contributions, like you say, but the quality he brings to midfield, the passing, the breaking up attacks, his leadership and his character and his personality, I think, are absolutely huge for this team. And that was an area they were lacking in last year. It's something Ten Hag's touched on a few times this season, that his analysis of the squad, as he often calls it, showed that they needed players like that in the summer, and he ticks every box. And I think there was, when they signed him, I think we all had a few doubts spending that money on a 30-year-old. Real Madrid might have wanted to keep him, but they'd have snapped United's hand off for that money when they just signed Tchouaméni. But Casemiro's a better player than Tchouaméni is at the moment. He can't get a kick in the Real Madrid team, really, and it's been money well spent for United in terms of what he delivers and what he's continuing to deliver on the big stage. And it's the classic trope that big name players turn up for big games, and he's done it this week. He scored the first goal in the Carabao Cup final. He is incredibly valuable to United, and certainly one of the most important 2 or 3 players in that team, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And just lastly on Casemiro's attacking output, I mean, we're all surprised by what he's delivered this season in terms of the numbers in that sense. But having actually looked back at the stats, he actually got 13 direct goal contributions 2 seasons ago for Real Madrid as well. So he has, almost, even though he's probably caught a few people by surprise, he has got a bit of a reputation for chipping in from the engine room and delivering. But just lastly, Samuel, on Casemiro, obviously the vote is currently open. I'm putting you on the spot here, perhaps, for the Player of the Season award. Would he be the man that gets your vote with the way he's transformed this team overall?
Yeah, I was asked that on MUTV on Tuesday, and I suppose it was a good sign for United's season that the other panellists gave different answers. There was a shout for Martinez, a shout for Rashford. Ben Thornley gave a shout to Aaron Wan-Bissaka, which I thought was pretty left field and not something I agree with. But I can, Ben had a bad injury when he was younger, unfortunately, and I think he probably empathises a bit with Wan-Bissaka having a setback and then coming back as well as he has done. But it's still pretty preposterous to bracket him with Martinez, Casemiro, Rashford and the like. But Casemiro's just been colossal. He's a colossal presence. I think that you go back to the Chelsea game at Stamford Bridge, and on a day, that was a game, of course, where Ronaldo had been dropped from the squad, and they need a goal in a game where they'd wasted a couple of very good chances in the first half, in danger of losing it. And then there's another 5 times Champions League winner who gets in the penalty area, rises above everyone to head in a late goal to gain an invaluable point and really lift morale as well. You saw it in the celebrations that day. It's just a privilege to watch him, really. There are still a lot of players out there that when you go to games, you are genuinely excited about watching them. And Casemiro is one of those players. I always found it was going to be fascinating just observing him this season. But the way he conducts himself, the way he carries himself, his presence, just his positional sense as well. It's just best in class, really. And yeah, he would get my vote, which may seem a little harsh on Marcus Rashford, given that he's scored 30 goals this season. But yeah, Casemiro, I think if United hadn't have signed him, I don't think they get in the top four. They needed an influential midfielder, a defensive midfielder, and in the end, they've got someone who's got that steel of Keane, but he's also got the silkiness of Scholes, and Keane was a great passer of the ball as well. So it's not a ridiculous comparison. It's not daft to bracket Casemiro with Keane in terms of their qualities as midfielders in different generations.
Yeah, definitely. And just lastly, to wrap up this section on last night's game, Samuel mentioned there, Marcus Rashford, 30 goals for the season now. He only scored 5 last season. It's been a remarkable transformation for him, and the first United player in 10 years to hit 30
Yeah,
in a season.
absolutely. And I probably just about agree with Samuel that Casemiro is player of the season, but I think Rashford is Ten Hag's triumph for the season. You know, we all said when he came in that one of the key areas he could improve is basically improving players. And I said a few times that I think that a lot of players in this squad have suffered from a lack of elite level coaching and world class coaching. When you look at what's available at Liverpool and Manchester City and what was at Tottenham under Pochettino, United never really had that under Solskjaer for all his strengths, as well as Michael Carrick and Kieran McKenna have gone and done in the Football League. You know, they were inexperienced coaches at United when dealing with the level of those players. They certainly didn't get any of that under Ranić, and I think there was always a case to be made that some players would improve for Ten Hag's eye for detail, for his coaching ability, for the ability of his coaches, and Rashford especially is the poster boy for that, basically, that he looks a much, much better player for having clear instructions on the training ground, clear areas to improve his game, clear, a defined role in the team, whether it's on the left, whether it's through the middle. He knows what he's doing, he knows how he fits into the structure of everything, and I think he's benefited from that, and clearly he deserves a lot of credit himself for the way he's raised his game. And I don't think any of us saw him scoring 30 goals this season, but I do think as well that he is a real triumph for what Ten Hag could bring to this team beyond coming in and spending 225 million in a transfer window. He was always going to have to come in and improve players, and Rashford is the prime example of what he can do in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. He's certainly had a remarkable season, has Marcus Rashford, and he's been superb, to be fair. And that concludes part 1 of this Manchester is Red podcast. Do rejoin us in part 2, where we'll have a look at off-field situations and look ahead to the upcoming summer transfer window. Welcome back to part 2 to the Manchester is Red podcast. As we said there at the end of part 1, we're going to look at the transfer window now. And Samuel, we found out earlier this week that the window will officially open on the 14th of June, just under 3 weeks' time now. And you've done a story this morning regarding Harry Kane and the situation with him. And Tottenham basically are going to be reluctant to sell him, as we expected. United are now assessing other options just in case Plan A doesn't come off. I think this is all the situation that we expected, really, in the sense that Harry Kane is not going to be easily extracted from the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium this summer for United, is he?
No, and yet, strangely, United should be just offering Daniel Levy £100 million. Take it or leave it. See what happens there. I mean, Kane is Ten Hag's preferred, is his main target up front, and Ten Hag deserves that backing after the season he's presided over. So weirdly, there's a way of actually possibly getting this deal done quickly, because if Levy were to say no to £100 million, Joe Lewis, his pal at Tottenham and Enoch might actually be tapping him on the shoulder saying, actually, you've got to say yes to that, because that is great money for a 29-year-old who's out of contract next season, and we're not going to have any European football next season at this rate. Tottenham are 8th, so it looks like they might not get in the Europa Conference League next season. Kane has got to be ruthless if he really wants it. He's got to be starting to make moves now. I think the most clinical finish from him all year would have been to have sacked his brother as his agent, because that's always that was the issue a couple of years ago. the way they went about it was amateurish. I mean, Kane did that interview with Gary Neville, and I think he even said, ultimately, I'll have the final say. It's my decision. And you thought, reading that, like, have you met Daniel Levy? Are you familiar with how he works? It's always going to be Daniel Levy's final call, but you've got to exert the pressure on him. And Tottenham are in the pretty much the exact same. In fact, they're in a worse situation than they were 2 years ago when they sacked a manager. Ryan Mason ended the season as caretaker manager. They're out of the Champions League. They at least got some European football. Was it the Conference League they might have qualified for that season. This season they haven't even got that, and they're now scrambling around looking for a manager who actually wants to manage them. So, I mean, as I said, Kane has got to exert pressure if he really wants out of Spurs. If he doesn't, then he'll either sign a new contract or he'll leave on a free next year, and he won't be short of takers then, because he's too brilliant a player to have no esteemed clubs looking to sign him. But United have got to try there. I don't think they can just get some feedback from Daniel Levy or from Tottenham's side and decide, well, it's probably not worth it now. I think they really do need to test the waters there and see what can happen, because Ten Hag wants him. And if Ten Hag can't get him, fair enough, they'll have a contingency plan. There are a lot of strikers that they've been looking at. But that team needs a proven goal scorer, a high-quality goal scorer. And there aren't that many that are attainable this summer. There are a lot of strikers on the market, but there are a lot that you're looking as possible potential buys. I mean, Moani at Eintracht Frankfurt, his goal-scoring record has been decent this season, but would you be pulling out all stops to get him into United's team? Probably not. Same for Gonçalo Ramos or Mohamed Kudus, but one's at Benfica, the other's at Ajax. The leap of going from one of those leagues to the Premier League to a team who could finish this season in third, so there'll be some expectation from supporters that can you challenge for the league title next season. That is a huge ask. It did work with Lisandro Martinez, but it's and this is no disrespect to Martinez whatsoever, because I think he's been one of the signings of the season, but it's easier to be a defender in the Premier League than to be an attacker, to be a goal scorer. And United need someone who's not just going to come in and score 15 goals or something like that. They want them to be getting 30 goals like Marcus Rashford has done this season. So there are a lot of variables at play, as there always are, and maybe this will work in United's favour. Maybe this will actually unnerve Kane to get his act together. He did put in that statement a couple of years ago that he didn't want to jeopardise his relationship with Spurs fans, having just jeopardised it by the way he conducted it with that, as I said, that interview with Gary Neville. But I think Tottenham fans would probably be more understanding now. He's their greatest goal scorer. They got 2 more seasons out of him. Look at them, sheer disarray the club is in at the moment. Why, if you are Harry Kane, one of the best strikers in the world, and he's been one of the best strikers in the world for 7 or 8 years, why would you stick around? But Daniel Levy is an extremely, extremely stubborn man, and it is often to the detriment of Spurs as well, which I think is something that doesn't quite get the amount of attention that it perhaps should do. But maybe it will now, and we've seen the amount of the calls for Levy to leave Spurs at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But I think when we discussed a couple of months ago, whenever it was, who would we go for on a personal basis, the strikers to get, I don't think any of us said Kane, because you just saw a saga playing out that if that deal was ever going to get done, it would get done in August, well into August, and that compromises your preparations for the season. United need a couple of key players in for pre-season, the start of pre-season training. They're in a different situation compared to last year. They're in a stronger position to buy, so they've got to raise they've got to raise the bar again.
As Samuel's mentioned there, the elite level number 9 is what United need this summer. Harry Kane obviously is the ultimate target, but Champions League qualification has now been secured, so that's going to boost United's chances of getting alternative attainable targets. Obviously, Victor Osimhen of Napoli is kind of second in line, most people think, Do you think he's the man that United should turn to as the alternative if Spurs don't?
Yeah, I think he's certainly a very viable option. He looks Premier League ready. You look at the way he plays and his pace and his physicality. He looks like he'd fit in the Premier League. There's always a chance it'd take a year to settle. It'd take a bit of time to settle. But he's younger than Kane. I do think that's something that's got to be taken into equation. Ten Hag wants Kane, and he would definitely add to this team. But for how long is probably the question. And Ten Hag does seem to like signing players with experience. I know when he was appointed, there was the idea certainly online of I've got a coach who loves young players and prioritises young players. But when you look at his transfer history, even at Ajax, he signs older players a lot. He clearly sees that as a route to getting experience, and certainly Ajax relied on the academy. I think, if you put 100 million down for Tottenham next week, I think it would probably get done. I'm just not sure it's a wise idea to spend £100 million on a 30-year-old Harry Kane the year after you spent £70 million on a 30-year-old Casemiro. And I know I've just said how good Casemiro's been, but the reality is that team, as good as it then looks, is 2 to 3 years away from the spine basically need to be rebuilt. You need a new goalkeeper. Varane's going to be 31 then, I think. You'd have Casemiro 31, Eriksen 31, Fernandes 29, Kane 30. It's a pretty short shelf life for that team. And if they didn't win the Premier League or the Champions League within 3 years, I think you'd have to say it's a failure, really, if that's what they do and they do sign Kane. And he will, he is as close to a guarantee of gold as you can get. I don't doubt that at all. And we were talking leaving the stadium last night about how many points would he add to United, and I think minimum you'd say he'd probably add 10 points. But I don't think on its own it wins in the league. It wins United the league, and I think they need an improvement in midfield as well. They need a right back, they need a goalkeeper. So you have to bear all that in mind. And I do think Kane would be the best signing. I'm just not sure he's £100 million signing given his contract situation. I think United would also be setting themselves up for issues down the line with that sort of thing. We know everyone sees him as a soft touch in the transfer market, and they see him as a soft touch in the transfer market because they pay £80 million in cash in one go for Harry Maguire, and if they then pay £100 million for a player out of contract in 12 months, I think they'll just continue to get fleeced every transfer window. So there is, it is a balancing act, but you can certainly see why Ten Hag wants him, and like Samuel says, United have got to try for him. There's no point walking away now. They have got to try. They can easily set themselves a deadline of the end of June, and if it's not happening, you walk away. Then there will be alternatives on the table. But yeah, they've certainly got to push for him, I think, and try and get him at a reasonable price.
Yeah, they definitely have, and obviously the striker is, as we all know, is what they need more than anything else this summer. There's also a need to strengthen the squad overall in terms of depth. Samuel, there's been a lot of links in the build-up to the Chelsea game regarding Mason Mount. Obviously, his contract at Stamford Bridge is up at the end of next season. Obviously, there's an opportunity for somebody there to potentially buy him at a cut price deal this summer. Do you think he's the sort of player United should be going for this summer? He's obviously more of a number 10 than, your number 8 central midfielder. Bruno Fernandes has played a hell of a lot of football this season, not really had anybody to rotate with because of Donny van der Beek's injury since January. Do you think Mount would be a sensible signing if the price would be right?
No, I don't think he's what they need. They need a central midfielder who is of the profile of Mason Mount. I mean, the timing of that story coming out this week, it's not a coincidence that it came out in the week that United were playing Chelsea, and really it suits Mount to be linked with as many possible clubs that he could join this summer. There's been a lot of noise around Liverpool. There's a bit of noise around Arsenal as well, and it strengthens his bargaining position on the off chance that Chelsea meet his salary demands. I think he's after something like 250 grand a week because that's what Reece James is on. So the precedent has been set, and Mount is entitled to similar remuneration. And that story appeared in one of the newspapers this week from a London-based journalist as well. So I think some fans anyway can read between the lines, and it wasn't a coincidence either that Mount's long-time friend Declan Rice the following day was linked to United by the same reporter in the same newspaper, not questioning the validity of the stories or the source of the stories whatsoever, but that is how it often works. And they are two players who want to be, want to be linked to the best teams for different reasons. Declan Rice is going to leave West Ham. If that's not this summer, it's going to happen next summer. With Mount, I still wouldn't be too sure of him leaving Chelsea. You'd imagine that Pochettino's first port of call when he eventually takes over at Chelsea, as it looks like he's going to, it still seems to be taking an eternity for that to happen officially. But his first port of call would probably be to try and ensure that Mount stays and make him the fulcrum of that side, because Mount is a player who is very much aligned with Pochettino. When you go off the relatively young English players that he worked with and he hothoused and he made into the players that they were at Tottenham. I think if you think of Eric Dyer and Dele Alli, they played the best football of their career under Pochettino, and Chelsea must hope that he can have a similar impact on Mount and to the extent that the effect is so great that it results in Mount staying at Chelsea. And the other issue with United and them possibly signing a player who plays in a role that they do not need, really, that's not a pressing concern anyway, is that United do not have the money for this player, that player and the other player currently. They've got money set aside for a striker, but frankly they've been pleading poverty every now and then as to what else they can do, and a lot of that will depend on outgoings. You look at that United squad, they've got to sell players, and they're not the only ones. They're actually in quite a similar situation to Chelsea, who've got a very bloated squad. They've not even got Champions League revenue next season. They've spent an obscene amount of money in the last two transfer windows. They need to recoup money from sales, and with the profitability and the sustainability rules that are in the Premier League, there is a more pressing need for clubs to sell now. And also, we've not even touched upon the takeover situation or the ownership situation. So it's fanciful. There was one report in the week, and United almost laughed it off, where United were linked with Kane, Mount and Rice. I mean, that is not. They are not going to sign those three players in a single summer. I don't know. If that did happen, then I might as well. I will tender my resignation. That will not happen. I don't know in what reality they sign three prominent England players in a single summer at a cost of what? I mean, those three players, that's £250 million, nearly £300 million. Just where do they get the money for that currently? And even if with the takeover, they may well spend that, but then they've got to sell players as well. So it would be extraordinary if they did sign Rice, Kane, and Mount in the same window. But it would. I mean, the odds on that have got to be as long as Leicester winning the title at the start of the 2015-16 season. So I can see why Mount appeals to an extent to Ten Hag and the managers he's worked under. They've all raved about him. They've all really enjoyed working with him. But he operates higher up the pitch, and United's someone who's more of a schemer, operating from deep, because they're currently dependent on Casemiro and Eriksen, who've both been very good this season, but they're both 31, and it says a lot that when they came up against City in January, they tweaked that. They moved Eriksen further forward, and Casemiro had Fred next to him. That shows you that Ten Hag knows they need to re-energise the midfield, and he's certainly not talking about Fred or McTominay. He's talking about an external recruit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you've mentioned there Rice, Mount, Kane. It's never going to happen in a million years in one transfer window. Obviously, the striker, whoever they get, is going to take up a large chunk of their summer budget. Ty, do you think in that sense United potentially could they go down a similar route to what they did with Christian Eriksen last summer? Obviously, everybody knows Yuri Tillemans is one player that's out of contract this summer. Leicester looking very likely to be relegated. He'll almost certainly leave even if they do survive on the final day. Would he be somebody that I think United could take a punt on a free transfer?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of noise about Tielemans at the moment in terms of where he's going to go, and I don't think he's had a great season. In fact, I think he's had a pretty poor season, really. There was a lot of excitement around him maybe 18 months, 2 years ago, but that seems to have quietened down considerably now, and I'm just not sure he's really the upgrade required. I think is Yuri Tielemans any better than Fred? I'm not really sure he is. I think he's probably of a similar level. I know it's a free transfer and would save you some budget, but unless they sell McTominay, United aren't short of midfielders. They just need better players in there, I think, and what they really need is, like I said, a younger player in there who can come in for Eriksen especially at times, and offer something. And I don't know if Tielemans is that player, but like we say, Declan Rice might be that player, but he's not really going to be attainable in the same window as they're pushing for a striker. So it's not easy to do, but I think that has to be the target rather than taking a chance on another free transfer. I think they need to be looking in the 24 and under age bracket for a central midfielder who can come in and compete with Eriksen and eventually, I guess, take his place.
Yeah, it certainly promises to be interesting, no doubt. Frankie de Jong's name will be the one that comes up in the coming weeks. But that concludes part 2 of this Manchester is Red podcast. Do rejoin us in part 3, where we'll look ahead to the final day clash against Fulham at Old Trafford. Welcome back to part 3 of the Manchester is Red podcast. As I said a few moments ago, Fulham are United's final opponents for this season's Premier League campaign. United, of course, wrapping up the top 4 berth on Thursday night against Chelsea. And I suppose the big question ahead of this one, Samuel, is with the cup final only just over a week away now. How many changes does Erik ten Hag make to his starting lineup? I think that's going to be the main talking point of this game, isn't it?
He's very rarely done weakened teams or shadow squads this season as well. Eriksen and Casemiro started against Reading in the FA Cup in January, and Reading are going to be in League One next season. Hopefully not playing against Sheffield Wednesday, but you would think that for this game he would make changes, given that the cup final is 6 days away from the Fulham game. I don't think there's any chance of Rafael Varane starting. Ten Hag he has been one player who sometimes going into games, it's signposted that he's going to get a rest for his own conditioning, and the gap between the Chelsea game and the City game it's only 9 days. That's not a long time. It's not a period of time where players are likely to be rusty when they line up at Wembley. You've got to do what's best for the team, and so Varane, Eriksen, Casemiro, I don't think should be anywhere near the starting side on Sunday. Fernandes has this crazy mentality that he just has to play every game and play every minute of every game. He wouldn't have been happy about coming off last night even. Rashford and Garnacho could do with starts to properly prepare them for Wembley next week. Garnacho has been unfortunate not to have started in the last 2 games. Rashford, I suspect that was part of Ten Hag's strategy, that he would bring in Rashford against Chelsea and then start him against Fulham ahead of starting in the cup final. In the end, he came on a hell of a lot earlier against Chelsea than anyone would have liked. And I don't think there's going to be any need to risk Luke Shaw. I mean, we don't know the extent of his back problem, but if he's got a problem on a Thursday, you wouldn't be playing him on a Sunday when you've got an FA Cup final the next Saturday. And it also might be Harry Maguire's Manchester United farewell, which is I think that's probably the first time that has even been mentioned. He's very, very much he's someone who's not really getting any mentions in press conferences, Ten Hag press conferences these days, because everybody, I think, has realised that the situation for him is pretty straightforward. He has to leave in the summer, and Gareth Southgate said earlier in the week when he announced his England squad that situation essentially cannot continue. I think it was all right for him this season because the World Cup started in November, so it was just 3 months of a peripheral role, but a whole year, well, it would be longer than that, United, as part of 2 years of having a peripheral role going into a Euros, I'm not sure Maguire would be able to get away with that and keep his place in the England team.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like it could be like you said, it could be his farewell on Sunday afternoon. But Ty, looking in regards to the situation with the right wing, and obviously Anthony's injury has thrown a potential spanner in the works in regards to this game against Fulham, because you would have thought he probably would get a rest on the for the City game at Wembley on a week on Saturday. Do you think there's an outside chance perhaps that Facundo Pellistri could maybe come in and get his first Premier League start?
Not something I'd really. I mean, that's the first I've thought of it, but yeah, I can't see it. And well, like we've seen from Ten Hag, he doesn't strike you as the type of person to make wholesale changes. I still think he'll value finishing third ahead of fourth. I agree with Samuel. I think Garnacho will start, but I think he'd probably start Sancho again on the right and play Rashford through the middle, I guess, and then I'd probably look to bring Weghorst on after an hour, something like that for Rashford. And yeah, I think you can afford to play a few of those players. I think Fernandes will play. We've said this before. I think Fernandes will play right on the right in the cup final. So I think it essentially leaves one of Sancho and Martial to start in that front three with Rashford and Fernandes. So you can probably afford to start Sancho and give Martial some time off the bench. I think Fred will start because I think he's the one that's probably going to come into midfield in the cup final. So you want to get him up to speed ahead of Wembley. But I still don't think we'll see loads of changes. I agree with the three Samuel mentioned, Varane, Casemiro and Eriksen. I wouldn't see any sense in starting them. Wouldn't surprise me if Ten Hag started at least one of them, maybe Casemiro. But I wouldn't be. And then, yeah, a lot of the team with the injuries picks itself. Like we say, Malacia is going to start ahead of Shaw. You'd probably make a change at right back, I guess, just to rotate. But I still think he'll go fairly strong. And Pellistri had that kind of bright spell in January and February when he's coming off the bench. But it feels like he's been nowhere near it again recently. And I think he was the one to drop out of the squad completely yesterday when Rashford was back in. So, yeah, I'd be surprised if he was considered for a start.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? We know Erik Ten Hag, whatever the game, whatever the opposition, his hunger and determination to win. It is very rare, as Samuel said earlier on, that he will name a weakened 11. And I wouldn't bet against him sticking with his strongest 11 on Sunday. I know he might make one or two tweaks, but I wouldn't bet against it being as you were on Thursday night. But whether they finish third or fourth, Samuel, we know the main objective has been achieved. Just, when you think back to what happened at Brentford back in August, Brighton on the opening day as well, I don't think many United fans probably would have given United much of a hope of getting this done with a game to spare when they've really been in command of the destiny for quite some time.
Yeah, Ten Hag has done an excellent job this season. There've been a lot of very good jobs by managers in the top flight. Steve Cooper's done brilliantly to really suffer through that season with Nottingham Forest, all the grief he's had to put up with above him, and he's kept his job, and he's done himself no harm whatsoever ahead of possibly managing England in the future. I think he has to be in the conversation with that. Unai Emery's done brilliantly since he came in at Villa. Arteta, whatever you say about Arsenal, they did choke in the run-in, but Arteta has overseen a fine season. No right-minded individual, I think, would have had Arsenal down to finish second when the predictions were being published back in July and August. And I hold my hands up. I thought at the start of the season I'd United down to finish fifth. I just thought that, given the quality elsewhere and this period of transition, that it was a real tall order for them to finish in the top four. And those predictions can be they can be pretty treacherous anyway, but sometimes, especially given how early the season started, and United had signed about, I think half of their summer signings had been made by that point. They hadn't signed Casemiro or Antony, and I suppose we can mention Martin Dubravka as well. He was among the six who came in, but they were, if they'd ended the transfer window with that squad that they had against Brighton, or the players that were available and that were unavailable, they would not have finished in the top four. I don't think. I think they might have even struggled to finish above Brighton, but they made a couple more key additions. That's why Casemiro has been so pivotal, and really since he got into the team in October, they've had a modern midfield. As I said, although their away record has been pretty poor this season, they have had also games away from home where they've been a hell of a lot better just by his presence on the pitch. But it always goes back to the manager. And I said before the League Cup final that even if United don't win a trophy this season, they'll have still made the right decision with Ten Hag. And it's so far so good. It's been a good season. It will be a great season if they do win the FA Cup, given what's at stake there for themselves and for City. And really, Ten Hag, he's impressed at just about every level that a modern manager needs to. He's a good manager. He's a disciplinarian. He doesn't take any grief from the egos, and that's been a big aspect of his management. I think certainly before I spoke to someone who knows Ten Hag, one of my reservations was that can he handle the egos in that dressing room? He dealt with Cristiano Ronaldo. He saw off Cristiano Ronaldo. Everyone else is small fry. His in-game management, although there have been some wobbles in recent months, that has been excellent by and large. United are more tactically sophisticated. They seem a much more flexible side, and there are better variations about their play. They pretty much set up in the same formation all season, but it's not rigid. There's clearly some fluidity about them, and although with some of the signings, it's not exactly Christian Eriksen wasn't an unknown and Casemiro wasn't an unknown, but Lisandro Martinez would not necessarily have been high up United fans' wish list last summer, and he's been terrific. So his recruitment hit rate is pretty good. Some of the loanees have been pretty useful. But then you've had even, I suppose, again, I don't know how Martin Dubravka's got 2 mentions now, but he wasn't useful. But by and large, when you look at his body of work of recruitment, management, coaching, improving players collectively and individually, Ty said earlier about the project he's overseeing with Rashford, which has included some public discipline as well. He's done a brilliant job at United this season, and I think it will have been very reassuring for supporters what he said after the press conference on Thursday night, that just finishing in the top 4, he said it's not good enough for me, because he was reminded how Arsenal became sanguine with just season after season of finishing in the top 4. So they're on the right track and they're in the right pair of hands. Now it's over to the power brokers to give him the back-in that he needs and deserves.
Yeah, definitely. He certainly won over any doubters, that's for sure. And just lastly, to wrap up, Samuel summed it up perfectly there, really, Ty. But obviously, everybody talks about Casemiro and Martinez, the impacts they've had signed of the season. I think Erik Ten Hag is United's signing of the season.
Yeah, definitely. It's gone a lot better, I think, than any of us suggested. And like a few people mentioned last night, and Ten Hag mentioned, this season is a success, whether they win that cup final or not. It's obviously going to sting if they don't. If they do, then it's going to be a hell of a success. But to be where they are, especially after the way those first 2 games went, to have recovered after Brentford is fantastic. And I think if they win on Sunday, I think it'll be their second highest points total in the 10 years since Ferguson. I mean, that's a significant improvement from where they were last season. So you have to give him immense credit, really. And I think when he got the job, I think we all had doubts in some degree or other compared against Pochettino. I think there were always uncertainties, but he's done a fantastic job. And I actually listened back to his first press conference the other day. It was Tuesday, I think, was the 1-year anniversary of his first press conference. And one of his biggest improvements has been his ability to speak English and communicate. His press conferences now are an awful lot cleaner and crisper and longer than the first one when he first got the job. And his ability to get his message across, though, was obvious that day. A lot of the things he said there have kind of panned out, and they make more sense now a year on than they did on the day when he said it. And yeah, he has been a very shrewd appointment, and I think the club deserve credit for getting it right. Basically, he clearly sold a vision that John Murta and Fletcher and others liked and liked what they saw. Pochettino would probably have been the easier choice given his body of work in the Premier League, but they deserve credit for going with Ten Hag, and whatever they saw in him is certainly paying off.
yeah, definitely exciting times ahead for the club, that's for sure, ahead of the summer and next season. And hopefully, back in the Champions League, more excitement will be around the corner. But that's all we've got time for on this episode of the Manchester is Red podcast. A big thank you as ever to Samuel and Tyrone for joining me this lunchtime. Obviously, it goes without saying that if you enjoyed this podcast and would prefer to watch it as well, we are now available on YouTube. Just search Manchester is Red and you can subscribe to the channel there. And we'll be back to reflect on the final day clash with Fulham and build up to next Saturday's huge FA Cup final at Wembley against City, of course, next week. So have a great weekend and we'll catch you again very, very soon.